Hello, my friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family. Thank you guys for joining me once again on short notice. And I don't think anybody got any notice, really. You probably just had to look and see. Oh, okay. Just now it's coming out. Okay. Well, we'll take better late than never. So good to see all you guys. So, we're going to be talking about giants and aliens and UFOs and all of the like, as well as other things. Good to see you guys there. And first, though, I want to start off with a couple prayer requests. And so this is Jennifer. Jennifer lives in Georgia. She's been with us a long time. She is a wonderful person. And, I knew she was not feeling well. And, I feel so bad because I've been meaning to put her prayer request in for several days now. And honestly, I keep forgetting. So I just got contacted by her again, and she's been in the hospital for a week. So she has a problem with her thyroid. She has a goiter. The thyroid got to the point where she actually had a heart attack. So, and she's young. She's only, well, relatively young. She's 45. To me, that's young. And so she's had a heart attack. They're going to do surgery to remove the thyroid. So let's all send her prayers, love, and healing energy. And then we also have a request also for Andrew. And this is Andrew on the left, and that's Artemis, his daughter, on the right. They're going through a very rough time, family things going on, and let's send prayers of peace, love, and well-being to them. May their situation be resolved in a beautiful, harmonious manner as soon as possible. Andrew's also a musician, and he's quite gifted and really a beautiful soul, as is Jennifer. They're both very good friends and very good members of our family. So please join me in sending them positive healing energy and prayers. So again, that's Andrew and Jennifer. And thank you guys for doing that. So the other thing I wanted to cover before we get going, this is a friend's channel, which I have interviewed her in the past, and we're just trying to get together to do another interview. She talks all about ascension symptoms, and also especially about like how we are changing from carbon-based life form to a crystalline-based life form. And so with her, as some other people have noticed as well, you can actually see their skin sparkling and glittering. There's a lot of things going on. We've talked about nanotechnology. We've talked about the possibility or probability that there is nanotechnology in so many of us right now. So this is the other side of this story. This is basically what's happening consciously as well. And I've watched a lot of her videos, and you really can see that there's like a crystalline substance embedded in the skin. And it's not like the sparkles that you would put on with makeup and things like that. So her name is Tony Taylor. So if you guys are interested in ascension and ascension symptoms and going from being a carbon-based life form to a crystalline-based life form, definitely check her out, subscribe, and get all the notices as well. She is a wonderful person to interview, so full of great information, and I would definitely recommend checking out her channel, as well as what was our backup channel. It's been renamed from Evolutionary Energy Arts to EE Arts, just to distinguish. And so over here, it's going to be more spiritually based things, and some things that I know we don't always all agree because we have a very diverse family here. Not all of us see things the same. So there are some things that people don't like to touch on, and there's other things that people are very open to, such as over here, the tarot cards, and using something like the tarot to get more attached and to get clearer messages from our higher self, source, creator, however you want to word it. And so this is going to be more of the spiritual side of things, and evolutionary energy arts is going to be earth changes, but also going into things like we're discussing tonight. It's about, we're going to be looking at the giants a lot, and also UFOs, ET, is there life out there? And so I guess sometimes because I leave things a little bit kind of open, and I've gotten a couple of messages today and from people saying, thank you for being so informative, and thank you for not pushing on us, your beliefs, pushing on us your beliefs. I don't want to push my beliefs on anybody, because we each have to come to our own set of beliefs, but it's good to look at evidence, and sometimes, we can become a little bit closed off to other sources of evidence. And so we're going to look at a different tradition or two here tonight too, that probably most of you have not been exposed to. And when you start looking at, what do people believe in other spots of the world? What are their stories, their legends, their myths? Then you put them with the ones that you were brought up with, and look at a few more. It really makes a well-rounded picture, and we can start to see that, there's a lot of congruency going on. There's a lot of things that we agree on, and we might even, not call things exactly by the same name, but it's the same story being replayed time and time again. So this is the King James Version, and here we see Genesis 6:4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. So as I brought up to you guys before, when you look at this, it's kind of hard to look at it any other way but saying that basically there were giants. They took some women to be their wives, and they had kids, and these kids were the mighty men of old. And I think we're talking about beings like Hercules, for instance. Maybe we're talking about like Samson. And Osboy, thank you so much for your super chat. You are very, very kind, my friend. Thank you for your support so much. So this is an interesting statement, because it's saying that these beings were good. They were positive and good, and they were a hybrid, obviously. And so we see other legends, like we're going to touch on, talking about beings like Hanuman. And so Hanuman is a Hindu god that's known for his strength, and also known for his devotion to righteousness, and also basically a giant, and perhaps even related to Bigfoot in some lines of thought. But it's just fascinating, because when we go to the, right after this, when we go like to the next statement, then it gets into the flood and the fact that there were, hybrids everywhere, and God saw it was wrong and had to wipe out the hybrids. And so, the flood came. Very, very interesting, because this is a positive statement. And then the next that comes up, we're looking at a very negative situation, or apparently negative situation. And we've talked about the red-headed giants that in even the Native American legends are carnivorous and, not so benevolent by any means. There's so much going on right now with the thought of this slow disclosure. Most Americans don't trust the federal government on UFOs. So says a survey. Yeah. Pretty interesting to see. So the existence of extraterrestrial flying objects is one of the longest enduring. Do you like this when they say this word right here, conspiracy theory? I've touched on this before. It was thought that it was conspiracy theories, that maybe microwaves aren't good for you. Maybe the nonstick cookware we used to have that with the BPAs wasn't good for you. We could go on and on about things that were conspiracy theories, but in reality, they all got proven to be pretty much dead on. And so, a lot of people prefer to be called truthers, or maybe some other term, truth seekers. Those that aren't afraid to just go ahead and voice their opinion in face of, the mainstream agenda is really it. So almost 2/3 of Americans believe the federal government knows more than it's saying as far as UFOs and alien. Gallup said researchers discovered 68% of the respondents answered yes when asked whether the U.S. government knows more about UFOs than it is telling us. 29% said no. Of those who answered yes, about half said they believe the government's hiding information about alien space landings. 33% they believe an alien spacecraft has visited Earth at some point. And the survey results continue a decades-long trend of distrust among Americans for their government on the subject of intelligent alien life. So their survey back in '96 showed 71% didn't trust the government on the issue. Of course, they go into Roswell and so much stuff. It's not just those, though. You know, there's evidence going back throughout history. Just look at our myths and legends. We showed a whole bunch of artwork that, some of it is from around 1000 AD, 1100 AD, 1200 AD, depicting UFOs, involved in religious scenes. It's everywhere. It's so permeated in our existence and our beings. We have always seen stuff in the sky. It's gotten harder now if you live in a city, with all the lights and stuff, it blocks out. But if you're in the middle of the desert like, I am at the moment, and, basically you're almost 100 miles away from any decent-sized civilization, you get to see a lot. And there is a lot out there. So we may be closing in on the discovery of ancient life. Are we prepared? I think a lot of us here, it's not going to faze us even slightly. Maybe we'll be surprised that they actually do give us some token crumbs of truth. But it won't surprise us at all. But it will change the paradigm of a ton of people, and that is going to be terrifying to them. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. So probably what they're going to do, and this is by Seth Shostak. So if you're very familiar with Seth, again, he's part of SETI, so the Search for Extraterrestrial Life, and, I think he is in on the know. That's my personal feeling of it. I think, he downplays things kind of purposefully as well. Because again, it's an official channel, and the official channels. You know how the official channels are. You're allowed to only say so much. That's basically what we are, unfortunately, looking at. You're allowed to only say so much. Sorry about my little phone jumping off there, guys. But we recognize that. It's the same thing with anything that comes from NASA and NOAA. And, we don't trust that NASA's giving us a straight answer. And actually, most of us believe it's never a straight answer. Most of us believe that's the case. But we could see that they are leaking things out. And so, interesting. I guarantee you probably the first thing they will say is they have found still maybe active bacterial forms of life on Mars. They've already come out and said, well, it's had water. We get, and now they're even saying, there was a time when Venus was probably very, very habitable. And so that's new as well. They'll give us the fact that there's still bacterial life there. That'll be coming pretty soon. And we also have basically the Blink-182 former lead singer Tom DeLonge talking about having evidence. He's got evidence. As you see, we talked about this as well. And physical evidence to make some sort of definitive conclusion. And many people believe he's another one that's basically on the take. And again, this is part of a disclosure that might be slanted so we're not getting the real truth again. And so when you look at Corey Goode and David Wilcock and all the other ones that are coming out of the woodwork now over on Gaia, I feel like there's a lot of truth there, but then I also just have this feeling like there is, again, still some sort of, they give you the truth, but they're going to get you looking down the wrong rabbit hole. So I think that's what's going on right now. There's been so much going on when we see that. And so thank you guys again so much for your support in every way. And also emotionally in your prayers and support, because as I've shared with you guys, it's been pretty wild. And I was just talking to, many of you guys know Ray. He's been with us from pretty much the beginning as well. You know, a subscriber, I think probably from the first 1,000 subscribers. And just about 4 days ago, we were driving, you know, on the only road that there is in this whole area. And this fighter jet pulls straight up pretty much next to us. And honestly, Cindy thought it was almost like showing itself to us on purpose. And she was in her car and I was in my truck. And because I had to get an oil change. So basically, it was amazing. The thing that didn't hit me about it, because I was reaching for my phone and, you know, I was trying to hit the camera so I could at least get a photo or a video, but I was also doing, I'm going to say 75. It might have been a little bit higher than that. And this thing wasn't pulling away from me too fast, not that fast at all. But I couldn't get a photo. And the thing is, it didn't click until Cindy told me that you didn't hear anything from it, did you? And no. And this was only like, I'd say 150 feet from us, anywhere between 100 and 200 feet from the road, and really only about 5 to 10 feet off the ground. That's what it really looked like. And it wasn't making a sound, not a sound. And that's the thing that really boggles my mind. Back around 2000, I saw what I think was a TR-3B. And this was at Milford, Connecticut, on the beach, looking at Silver Sands, on Silver Sands Beach, looking at Charles Island. And we watched it for 20 minutes, and it only moved like 10 miles an hour, if that, 5 to 10 miles an hour. It was slow. It hovered. It was about 3 telephone poles in the air. And I knew it was man-made. I didn't feel that was extraterrestrial. I think it was just technology that we have. But it didn't make a sound. Now this... it was the same sort of tech in my mind. It's the same sort of technology because it didn't make a sound, and that's the most boggling part of it. I don't know, you know, would you say it looked like more like an F-22, or did it look more evolved than that?
I thought it looked a little more evolved. It seemed very streamlined, and the crazy thing is, it was totally silent, and it was grazing the ground. I was shocked, really. It was surreal. That's a good word.
Yeah, I actually thought the thing was going to crash. That's what I thought. I really did. I thought it was going to crash. I thought it was somebody having problems, and we were just going to see it just go down and just this big blaze of fire.
When it was headed towards the mountains, I was waiting for it to pull up because I was trying to track it with my eyes, and I couldn't. It's almost like it vanished into the mountains. So either some type of cloaking technology, or they've gotten so good at camouflage. It was amazing.
Yeah, because where it was just basically there's just a straight run, and then there's mountains on every side. So it did not pull up. We did not see it pull up. It didn't really have room to bank to the right without smashing into mountains. And straight ahead of it, not too far away, was a huge mountain ridge that it would have to be in our sight to pull up. We would have seen it. And then to the left, the same thing. We would have seen it. It just disappeared.
It did. It was crazy. Surreal. That's the word that keeps popping in my head. I've lived here for a long time. I've been on the roads a lot, and I've seen them playing around in the air together as a group. The other thing is it was alone. It was just one.
Yeah. So you've never seen them just one?
Never, ever. Mm-mm.
So yeah, pretty. Oh my God.
Oh my.
Thank you so much for your support, and you shall be entertained regularly.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you, my friend, for your support. And honestly, because with everything that's going on with YouTube, it's just been so censored to the point where it's kind of impossible to keep going on, living on what we were living on in the past. That is something of the past now. Because what happens a lot is they basically demonetize a video and you get 90% of your views in 24 hours. And then 24 hours later, they say, oh, it's okay. So then they monetize it. And so, then already you've missed the window. So thank you so much for your support. It's totally appreciated. And I really think we're going to see this stuff again because there's so much going on here. There is so much going on here. Yeah, I think that there's just amazing technology out there. I was just talking to a friend and just saying, I almost feel like they want a war almost to just show off the technology because it's going to be absolutely mind-blowing what is there. But, in my personal opinion, I do think that I think the militaries work with the ETs. I think that's been the case for quite a while. And I do think that there's ETs, and I do think that there's interdimensionals as well. I think there's both. There's these beings that can change their vibration, their frequency, and basically manifest into our reality, but then also manifest out of our reality. And I do think there are what we would call demonic energies out there that can use people. And a lot of you guys have been talking about that. One of our Patreons was just telling me and asking me if he thought it was the case, and he was describing a situation between him and his girl where he felt like they were being manipulated into having sex so that the things could feed off of the energy. And so, there's so many of these legends like incubus and succubus that are real. There really is a reality to that. Most definitely. And beings can feed off of that. And as I've shared with you, when we look into medical QiGong and we're studying, basically the Taoist philosophies, it's the same thing. Same stories are there, coming from China. Same stories that were shared with the Europeans and also with the indigenous people of the Americas and also with the Australian Aborigines and over in Africa as well. We all have the same legends. We all really have the same stories. They all tie together. It's really, really amazing. And now we could actually put it all together because, we have this internet, which is a double-edged sword. They could watch us, but then we could also learn, as well on our own. And, it's like I shared with you guys that I did a story, a video on the giants of Lovelock, Nevada, which is in northern Nevada. And Lovelock Cave is a very interesting site where they found a lot of artifacts, tons of artifacts. And the natives will tell you, the Paiute will tell you that those are the red-headed giants that live there. And the Paiute themselves ended up taking out the last family of red-headed giants that were living there by basically setting a fire in front of the entrance. So they had to come out and then showering them with arrows because these giants would snag their people and eat them. And, they believe this is a truth. This is a reality. It's not like a myth. They totally, totally believe this, and they've shared it with us. So that video, which was really interesting because that's really the whole focus of it, it got demonetized, and then they reviewed it, and they left it that way. So basically, it's, you're onto something when you're talking about these things. There is something here, something major here. And out of strange sounds, we see ancient giants buried in Alaska. So I remember reading about Ivan Sanderson before when I was a kid. This always fascinated me. He was a famous U.S. zoologist. And he once shared with the public a curious story about a letter he received from Alan Maxshear, an engineer who was stationed on the Aleutian island of Shemya during World War II. So while building an airstrip, his crew bulldozed a group of hills and discovered under several sedimentary layers what appeared to be human remains. The Alaskan mound was in fact a graveyard of gigantic human remains consisting of crania and long leg bones. And that's a pretty interesting skull. Now, pretty fascinating as well. 6 fingers, 6 toes. That seems to be one of the interesting things that we see from the giants. Double rows of teeth. That's another thing that's anomalous that we see repeated. And then these odd-shaped crania that they tell us were all done by people just thinking it looked beautiful. And so they just put boards on the child's skull, and, in order to have them develop that way and solidify into that type of pattern. But we have found skulls that have the foramen magnum, which is where the spinal cord goes through, in a totally different place than Homo sapiens sapiens. And also we found skulls that don't have the same plates. They don't have the exact same plates like we do with the frontal, the parietal, the sphenoid, and the temporal. They're different. They are literally different. If you look at this is a massive skull. The crania measured from 22 to 24 inches from base to crown. The width was 11 inches. An adult skull normally measures about 8 inches from back to front. So, that would imply an immense size. So, if you're looking at it that way, it might be a being that's almost 3 times the average human size. Pretty interesting stuff. And there are so many cases of skeletons of giants where the Smithsonian comes out and investigates, and then they're gone. We lose them to history. So what is the reality of this? And as it says here, double row of teeth. Very, very interesting stuff. I love it too when you look at these ancient articles that they had. Old articles from like 1880s, 1890s. Skeletons of giants in Alaska, ancient cemetery uncovered. There's so many of these. It's just so cool. It really is. And it's so interesting. We find these all over the place. And we have a graveyard of ancient giants unearthed in China as well. And people in the olden days weren't that tall on average. If we look at 1900, I believe the average man was about 5'5". And my mother has the records of like my great-great-grandfather, coming over on the boat on her side, came from Ireland, and it listed him at like 5'3" and I think 140 pounds. But people were smaller. So when you see skeletons that are 6.5, 7 foot tall in China, that's kind of unusual in and of itself. So then we get into some of the legends. And so a lot of us, in the Western world might not be so familiar with Hanuman. And so this is Hanuman. And then we have Rama and Sita. So Ram is an incarnation of Vishnu. So he's known to be an avatar Vishnu. And Vishnu is one of the big three: Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva. And Brahma is the creator, Vishnu is the preserver, Shiva is the destroyer. So this is an incarnation of Vishnu, and Sita is an incarnation of Lakshmi. And Lakshmi is the goddess of good fortune and wisdom. Not wisdom, that would be Sarasvati, but good fortune, abundance. And so it's interesting because these two supposedly reincarnate pretty much together. And Hanuman was a devotee of Ram and basically his right-hand man in so many ways, and was thought to be a giant, but also a monkey man, a monkey god, almost like, perhaps like a Bigfoot in some ways, but very intelligent. But then again, maybe Bigfoot is intelligent as well. When we see, like this is Michael Tellinger, there are so many footprints in stone all around the world. And, many people will say, well, maybe they were all carved. Maybe they weren't real. When you talk to the local people, they will tell you, no, this was Hanuman. And there are, especially around Sri Lanka and over in that area, so many footprints attributed to Hanuman. But perhaps there was a race of beings like that. And, maybe that's where they got the whole idea of King Kong from in some ways. There's an awful lot of, there's got to be some truth to these legends. And some of these footprints look very legit. Like this one looks pretty legit. And so if this footprint is somewhere probably around 4.5 feet long, that's pretty big. How big would a person be at that? I mean, if the average person, the average male now, just round it up to a foot, and it's probably not even quite that much for a 6-foot man. So if we times it by 4, would this be a 24 to 30 foot tall giant? Pretty interesting, but that's what the legends say. And we see another one here. Again, it's about the same proportions, I would say, at least. Very, very interesting. These are found all over the world. Interestingly enough, Southeast Asia has a lot, and there's been some interesting ones in Siberia as well. And of course, there's not a lot in Siberia. So you got to wonder, just as we've discovered when we've been looking into the Brazilian rainforest now, which is so overgrown, there's not a lot there. But as they keep going on with the deforestation and, horribly raping the environment, they are uncovering a lot of things that are very interesting, including evidences of cities that would have populations that would have been larger than anything that we would give as far as the amount of people in any city in the Americas when, say, when the Spaniards first came and started to interact. So perhaps populations in ancient times maybe they were on a par with what we have now. And then after, all the cataclysms that we've had, we go back to the Stone Age and do it all over again. So these footprints are found all over the world, and there's tons of them. Here's another one. And there's another one. Now this one looks to me to be maybe a little more fakeish. But again, it's supposed to be Hanuman's footprint. But then again, it's one of those cases where they probably attribute all of them to him because he's the most famous of his type. But it was recognized that he wasn't the only of his type. There were many of his type. And then there are other giants as well. And so these are supposed to be footprints as well. And those are pretty dang big. You would have to guess that the being would be at least 35, 40 feet tall if that truly was the size of their footprint. But there's legends of that. And there are accounts too. I remember reading an account of a 36-foot skeleton once dug up. Look at the size of this one. That looks pretty lifelike. And there's another one, again, probably looking at the same size being. And here's yet another. And of course, everybody's got to take their shoes off and stick their feet in there. I would too. And look at that one. Pretty interesting too. And then there are some anomalies that we have found with human artifacts and footprints right next to dinosaur ones in the same strata. And that gets you wondering too. So, what really is our history? I don't think we know it all when you get down to it. We have such, bits and pieces going on. Just bits and pieces. If you believe in mud floods, then, perhaps you believe that really, maybe there were giants and dinosaurs around not too long ago. We just don't know. That's the problem. We just don't know. There were legends of live dinosaurs in Africa when we first were exploring through there. When we say we, when the colonists, the white colonists from the UK, England and the like were getting down there, they were having some of the natives telling them that these gigantic reptiles were still there. There were still were. And some people believe, Loch Ness is still real. And this is another one. And yet another one. So it really gets us thinking about, legends of Bigfoot. And this is a famous Patterson film. And I watched a really good analysis of it. And I don't remember the guy's name right now. But basically, he really analyzed it. And, came to the conclusion that it's real. This is real just because of the gate. Everything in the gate. But, what's interesting, too, is he's found that the face has been kind of purposely altered and blurred because he thinks the detail was a lot clearer in it. And so when we see this, and what if I told you that scientists would tell you this is a real thing? And yeah, we actually have teeth and, pieces of bone from this. Because to me, well, that's what I expect a Bigfoot to look like. That's exactly, and that's how big they were. And so this is Gigantopithecus, which is basically, it's an accepted fact that this lived. It's an accepted fact. Now, they think it died out maybe 100,000 years ago or a little bit more. But again, timelines. How do we believe their timelines? Do we trust NASA? Do we trust NOAA? Do we trust the federal government to give us the honest to God, truth? Obviously, we don't. So perhaps it never fully died out. Perhaps it's still around. I mean, that's the thing that always boggled my mind is you have scientists that say, no, Bigfoot doesn't exist. No. But then they say, well, yeah, there was Gigantopithecus, and yeah, it happened to look just like a Bigfoot, maybe 8 to 10 feet tall, maybe weighing 1,000, 1,200 pounds. And, it's just coincidence. It looks like Bigfoot, sounds like Bigfoot, smells like Bigfoot, but no, it can't be Bigfoot. Can't be Sasquatch. There's none of those around. No. I think it's pretty obvious that this is the same thing we're talking about. And so most of the bones that we have and teeth come from China with Gigantopithecus. And it's just fascinating because we do have legends of Bigfoot-like creatures all over the globe. Very curious, too, that in a lot of the mythology, especially going over towards India, they're thought to be guardians of sacred places. And they guard Shambhala, which is that legendary city that perhaps exists on a different plane, or perhaps it's hidden inside the earth. And it's thought that it's inhabited by very advanced beings. And again, start putting those legends together. When, Lemuria went under and beings took off from Lemuria, same thing with Atlantis, and went to other places. And, a lot of them supposedly went inside the earth as well. And if we do have these cataclysms that come out every 12, 13,000 years, it would be safe to say that if they could escape it by going inside the earth, maybe some of them are hesitant to come back out. And maybe they've just developed a very, very high level of technology and have cities inside the earth. And perhaps some of these beings, if this being was around that long ago, how do we know how intelligent it is? Maybe it might be very intelligent. Some people believe that Bigfoot Sasquatch is actually another one of those beings that can manipulate the dimensions. And so, manifest itself, lower its vibrations, and come on in and be solid here in this 3D. And then also shift its vibratory rate and go up to maybe what we would call the astral realm or 4D. So interesting, but they are thought to be guardians of sacred places along some legends and myths that we have. And so interesting here is Lord Hanuman still alive. And Hanuman, again, is what we were talking about, basically that kind of a monkey god or a monkey man god. And if you read, or if you either read or you could watch online videos about the Ramayana and the story of Rama and Hanuman and Sita, it's fascinating when you get the timelines, because in the Western mind, the Western point of view, the Western scientific world, the Western religious world wants to make it so that these myths and legends are not that old, because the thought is the older things are truly, the closer maybe they are to the truth, and maybe they have more of the actual facts in them. So if you're talking to scholars on the Vedas, the Puranas, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Upanishads, and the like, they'll give you, if they're from an Indian background, basically, they'll give you a much different date than you're going to get from somebody in the Western world. So when you talk to people over in India, like, when did this really happen? Well, we're talking about really the age before this one for the most part. There's all sorts of guesses. Some people say, 5,000 BC, somewhere in that range. It's so interesting how this all ties together. And when we get into a real in-depth analysis, we keep seeing these patterns of these beings having these wars, and the technology that's evident when we start talking about, like, the Vimanas. When you're talking about the Vimanas, and the Vimanas are basically these flying ships that these beings go flying around in, and they're having wars. It sounds like Star Wars when you actually listen to these stories. It just speaks of Star Wars, shooting each other down. It's pretty fascinating. And then it's interesting that, as we see here, it says a few learned and wise people have reported seeing Hanuman. And one sage was said to have been graced with Lord Hanuman's visit in the 13th century AD. This is getting into something a little different, because Hanuman was supposed to be blessed with immortality. And while a lot of the other gods left and went somewhere else, a different world, a different reality, Hanuman stayed. And so another being that stayed is Babaji. And these are thought to be two immortals that are still here on Earth to this day, kind of guarding our realm, awaiting the return, perhaps, of these other gods that have gone. And maybe they will return. Interesting how we're waiting for the return of Christ, waiting for the return of the Imam Mahdi, waiting for the coming of the Maitreya, the next Buddha. It's interesting. And as we said with the Hopi, waiting for the return of White Pahana, our white brother, which really resembles Christ in so much of the mythology, as well as the star beings, star brothers and sisters. It's all very, very interesting. So, as you see here, 13th century, supposedly Hanuman visited this one sage, and in the early 1600s, he visited another and inspired him to write the Hindi Ramayana, entitled Ramcharit Mans. And then you have Ramadas Swami, Raghavendra Swami, Swami Ramdas, and Sri Saitha Sai Baba, all were said to have gotten darshan of Lord Hanuman as well. So it's just interesting, and I know a lot of you guys might not have been exposed to this as well. And then there's mantras to get in contact with these beings. And of course, there would be those that think that a being such as Hanuman perhaps is a demon, but he fights with the devas against the asuras, and the asuras are what in the Vedic philosophy are the actual demons. But see, there is that war again, that eternal war of dark and light that we see reflected in Zoroastrianism, and we talked about before how in many ways Zoroastrianism predates the Judeo-Christian line of thinking, but it is that same thing again with the dark against the light. And here it's getting into some of the footprints again, and some of the places that are mentioned in these myths and legends. And again, how much truth is in these myths and legends. And then footprints of Ram on an Iraq cliff. Interesting. And there's a lot going on here. There's a reason. We touched on this before too. There's a reason why these places that are seeing wars to a high degree. There's a big reason. And part of it is keeping all this covered up. Part of it is definitely, and thank you, Joffrey. Thank you for your support. As always, my friend, my brother. Part of it is obviously all about securing resources, but part of it is making sure that things that have been covered up stay covered up. That's a big part of it, because if we could put all these myths and legends together, we'll get a clearer picture of what's really happening. So this is interesting. An Indian delegation undertook an expedition in Iraq in June to look at a mural from circa 2000 BCE that Ayodhya Shod Sastan believes represents an image of Lord Ram. And again, that's Ram from the Ramayana. It's Rama. So it's interesting because this is in a different period, a different place in the world. And there's also an image that he thinks is Hanuman. These stories, are they kind of universal? I mean, there's different ones, slightly different accounts, slightly different names, but the same sort of stories. And again, which one is truly earlier? Because, here what we're getting at is totally different than what we're hearing in the Western world. Because, in here, they're basically saying that there's evidence that the Vedas, the Upanishads, and these legends that come from India are perhaps even older than the Sumerian ones. But there again, is it the same cast of characters? Is it the same beings that we're talking about? It's fascinating stuff to really, really look into. So the king and the monkey in the mural is an inadvertent reminder of Ram and Hanuman to many of us. Is it? Or is it the same beings again? So this particular historian claims this was the first official attempt to establish a connection between the Indus Valley civilization and the Mesopotamian civilizations. Citing various references, Singh said Lower Mesopotamia was ruled by the Sumerians between 4500 and 1900 BC, and claimed there was evidence to suggest that they may have come from India and were genetically linked to the Indus Valley civilization. What's fascinating is there are links between the Judeo tradition and the Indus Valley tradition as well. And I've touched on that in a few videos, and I'll go deeper into it when we get the opportunity moving forward. Very interesting, and we brought it up before, when Jewish people are in mourning, they are sitting Shiva. Interesting. Where did that come from? And then the thoughts that Abraham comes from Brahma, again, pulling from a different tradition, but the same roots. And Sarah, or Sarai, comes from Sarasvati. So is it, again, are there really origins that all these are pulling from? Pretty interesting. It's really fascinating. And so this is Yogananda about Babaji. And Babaji, again, is supposed to be an immortal that's still here and up in the Himalayas. And so, very fascinating. And in some traditions, there are those that believe he was a teacher even unto, and some people will fly off the wall. So part of me is saying don't even say it, but there are legends of Saint Issa that many of you might be familiar with. And so there's line of thought that he was perhaps the guru to Saint Issa. And of course, a lot of you guys probably know who Saint Issa is connected to as well. And then we have this character. And I say that affectionately because he's fascinating, truly. And so many of you might be familiar with Saint Germain, who's thought to possibly be another immortal. And Saint Germain is pretty fascinating. It really is. He's been seen at different times in different places, popping in and out. He's a great subject, very interesting. And, many people believe that he is an immortal, and some believe that, your best chance at seeing him is going to Mount Shasta. There's been many people that have claimed to see him at Mount Shasta. And so, now we view him in kind of a little bit of a different light. And it's just another one of those fascinating legends. And you really, really wondered, now, are all these immortals truly immortal? Well, how old did the Sumerian gods live to? They're basically immortal. Look at the Sumerian kings list. These beings ruled for tens of thousands of years, if we're to take it literally. So even go into the Bible, and the story from the Bible, very similar to the Sumerian story, and the Sumerian story predates it by 1,500, 2,000 years. As Abraham came from Ur of the Chaldees, which is again over there, So Babylon, in which again Sumeria, Acadia, very interesting. But all these talk about these beings having the ability to live almost forever. And, of course, then we could go into the biblical one. Methuselah, 969 years, right? Huge ages. And so when we look at the whole serpent thing, and so, we got the knowledge of good and evil, but we weren't allowed to, bite the apple of immortality, so to speak. And that was kept from us. Otherwise, we would have been exactly like the gods. So it's pretty interesting. And perhaps, there's some secrets to it that have been purposefully kept from us. And perhaps, when we think about the body itself, and we were having this conversation at lunch, your cells in your stomach get replaced every 3 days. Every 3 days, there's brand new cells. Your entire body, maybe every 10 years, right? Bones are 10 years?
Bones are 10 years, yeah. They said that we rebuild bones. I thought that was kind of fascinating, really. So the more fresher live food we eat, it just makes sense that it would rebuild the body even quicker. And they give us these foods that are all preservatives and stuff. That can't help us at all to eat preservatives. It's dead.
Yeah, and just dead foods. So, you could kind of take, I was going to say, you could take whatever U.S. RDA is and just throw it out the window. Of course, everybody has to make their own decisions on everything. But when we think about it, our bodies are constantly being changed, constantly. So why do we really age? It's all about the telomeres. So as the telomeres get shorter, we age and eventually we die. Now, what if we could regenerate the telomeres indefinitely? Well, one of the things that always seems to work is caloric restriction. All the studies we see, and I'm getting off a little bit of a tangent, but this is like another thing that's been just in my consciousness constantly now. Caloric restriction, especially if you reduce by about 30%, it shows that on most of the studies show you'll live about 6 or 7 years longer and you'll be healthier. So if you are a 180-pound man that's, eating 2,000 calories, you cut that back to 1,400 calories, you're probably going to live 6 or 7 years longer and it's going to be healthier. It's just one of those things. And then we've talked about, a lot of you guys have been bringing up breatharianism. A lot of you guys are experimenting, as we are, with, trying to eat just once a day and cutting back on food. We've talked about cutting back on food intake just simply because it's getting more expensive and there's a food crisis. But perhaps it's a blessing for us to delve into exactly how can we get healthier? How can we, be the best version of ourselves? How can we lengthen the telomeres and awaken things that are dormant in our DNA? So it's another fascinating thing. And so this is the untold story of the Asuras, Hindu mythology. Pretty interesting stuff. Again, the Asuras, they're thought to be like demons. And so as it says here, our earliest sensitivity of good and bad dates back to the childhood tales of the god and the demon. There have been as many descriptions of the devil as are for the god. The most righteous description this particular author finds is that God resides in our good deeds while the demon does in our bad. We are by now have been too familiar with the saying, an ideal mind is a devil's workshop. Well, actually it's an idle mind. So the earliest civilizations maintain a fascinating relationship between the good and the bad. So this dual nature was apparent in the Hindu scriptures that were composed about 5000 BC and are evident in the Hindu traditions even today. So on a small scale, they form the expression of Hinduism as a whole. And so here you see actually what's thought to be a demon right here. And interesting that he's holding the cobra and he's going to lop its head off. The demons are basically, most of the time, depicted very very similar to the gods. And really interesting stuff when you get down to it. The earliest pictures of the demon is the Asura. The Asuras were perceived as lesser beings of the dark or underworld who were in a constant battle with the Devas, or the gods, yet were also closely related to them. The Puranas paint the kinship of the Asuras and Devas. They're actually kin. Interesting. So what are we really talking about here? According to which, Kashyapa, who married the 13 daughters of Prajapati, is the father to all the beings on earth, including Devas, Asuras, Manavas, or humans, and the entire animal world. Asuras, being older, are recalled as the primal gods of ancient times and the predecessors of the Devas. Okay, so that's starting to sound very much like the Asuras being like the Titans, and the Devas being the elder gods. The Devas being your Zeus and Jupiter and things along those lines, and the Asuras being more like Kronos and Rhea. So, again, are we getting into the same myths? Are we getting into the same stories? It's pretty interesting. One of the things we have to realize, too, is often it was the case that the local god of their enemy was basically viewed as a demon, whereas their god was viewed as a god. It's always, the enemy of my enemy type thing. So it's pretty interesting to see that. And so an engaging story validates the above theory. The early Vedic texts draw heavily from the Aryans, originally the immigrants from Central Asia, and that's a big interesting story in and of itself, who were worshippers of fire, and Agni is the god of fire in the Vedic thought, for its natural valor, and named their god as Ahura Mazda. So, we were talking about Ahura Mazda before, which later branched out as Asura and naturally found its way to India through the Persians. Even in their scriptures, the god of fire, or Agni, was originally an Asura, who later sides with the Devas. So the word Asur also represented the Assyrian nation and his worshippers, who were cruel with the treatment of the enemy. A hatred is thus known to have existed between the Indo-Aryans and the Persians. While cruelties were called off by the Persians later on, the Aryan family that migrated into India brought with them very bitter feelings towards Asur, and thus the term Asura, which at one time was considered an appealing label for the supreme being, became descriptive of only those who were the enemy of the gods. So it's most definitely a tangled mess, but it's a fascinating one at that. And, trying to sort all this out is just so much fun in my mind. I mean, do you guys think this is interesting and fun too? Yes, and Katrina, I love what you just said there. Demonetization, demonetization, comes from ignorance and evil, tyrannical stupidity. Totally, I agree with you so much. This is all so fascinating. And, I totally believe that we are all basically spiritual beings. So I think that we are beyond the flesh. However, when we're in the flesh, we're in a vehicle. It's a vehicle. It's an avatar, so that's what the body is. We are all most definitely way more than the body. And if we've incarnated many times, we've had many avatars, just as we've had many cars. Sometimes a Chevy, sometimes a Ford, sometimes a Subaru, sometimes a Honda, Most definitely. So I think it's really, really interesting. Matthew says the veil is thinning. Yeah. Yeah. Joffrey says very, very thin. Yeah, most definitely. And I think a lot of it really also depends on the person's vibration, because some are rising faster than others and quickening faster than others. Andrew says, sounds like something I would drink in the desert, like manna. So what was manna? What was the manna? What was the bread from heaven? Yeah, where did that come from as well? That's just another real interesting question. And I agree, Ray. Fancy meat suits. These are just meat suits. Katrina says, hope you predicted the World Wide Web. Yeah, I remember, we could definitely look at it like that. They described it as a web. Some people think they also talked about chemtrails up in the sky as well. Keith, yes, anatomic gold. There's a reason why gold and silver are valuable, especially gold. We know what silver can do, be an antiviral, antibacterial. It works. It really does work. And, Cindy doesn't look blue at all next to me, and she's drank gallons of colloidal silver.
I do. I make it at home and drink it, and I give it to my daughter and my grandkids, when they get the sniffles. And, it's good. You can put it in a spray bottle and use it spray it on your pillows, blankets. It kills the allergies. It's really good. And right around flu season, if you have kids that go to school, I use it as and instead of buying those wipes, I use the silver water. I just put it in a spray bottle and spray it down and wipe it down, and it works wonders. It's really good stuff. You can buy a generator online for $70 and get some distilled water and go for it.
Most definitely. It's something I think that we should all be doing, and I would recommend doing it yourself, because it's way more efficient than buying bottles of it, which can be pretty expensive. So, and I think, there's the same sort of thing going on with gold, which might have the ability to really raise our consciousness. And think about that. If some of those legends are true, and say gold had the ability to really raise our consciousness, or perhaps even perhaps there is even something there which could be related to immortality.
Yeah, immortality, because they say with the shipwrecks and stuff, and this kind of hit home with me. The shipwrecks, the gold is always pristine. It's always intact, no matter how long it's been in the water. So it might have some kind of preservative factor to it, maybe.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, we're talking about colloidal gold as well as colloidal silver. There's most definitely a reason why. And, we've talked about the Anunnaki and gold, and there are mines that are hundreds of thousands of years old in South Africa, and that happens to be exactly where these Sumerian legends say that they were mining. And then we also look at the American West out here. 86% of Nevada is owned by the government. And there's more gold mines here. There's just loaded with gold mines.
Yeah, there are. There's a lot. Ever since I moved here when I was 16, it's been all about the gold. Tons of it. And BLM, like you said, the people used to own the mineral rights to the land. But they've now since taken that over. So if you buy land and they happen to discover gold on it, it's not yours. So
it's still all about the gold. It's always been about it. So they're hiding from us the true value of gold. And perhaps it lies in consciousness, and perhaps it lies in immortality as well. So, if they wanted to keep people in the dark, then you'd probably want to take away as much gold as possible, or at least its real value as well. So all very, very interesting stuff. I want to thank you guys so much for joining us once again. And I also want to, again, welcome you guys to come over and subscribe to EE Arts if you haven't yet, and click the bell and get all the notifications. And that's the more spiritual side of things. And also, if you're so inclined, join us on Patreon as well. For just $1 a month, you can have access to some videos that won't be up on YouTube because they're just they're too controversial, and we would just get in trouble with them there. And so you could get some straight talk there as well, and see some new videos, and also support the channel. And we thank you guys so much for your support as always. So my friends, as always, love, light, peace, and happiness to you guys. And I look forward to your comments. God bless and namaste.
Bye, guys.